my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by, and also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with Tanya Pobuda. Last time we talked about representation and demographics, just laying the scene and hitting the hard data of what our community looks like. Go ahead and check that episode out if you haven't already. Should be available both on Shelf Stories and the One Stop Co-op Shop feed if you want it in podcast form. This episode is going to detail some of the pushback and some of the arguments and some of the discussions that we get into as we go along this bumpy road to hopefully make some progress towards greater representation, inclusion, and diversity, which is one of the central thesis statements of this channel. I hope that you enjoy the show. Here we go. So if you heard Tanya on different shows, that's kind of the layout, right? In terms of the demographics and, where we are, where we're going, what the community looks like, what the area looks like. We have to set the scene there, right? We have to set the scene there. And I think the most key one is the white designers, because that's just, 96% is a lot in terms of not matching up with what the area is. And it on one level, like you said, use the word flummoxing, that like, how could there be this resistance to, opening up the lens to a new audience? Well, that's where the pushback comes in. Yes. Because the pushback is that publishers are in this position where each time one of them kind of like opens up that gate, a massive amount of pushback comes in, where you get people in that area saying, well, this game's not for me anymore. And so I'm going to withdraw my pledge. Just happened with Frosthaven. Right. So Isaac says, I'm going to market this to a new audience. Didn't even mention money. He just mentioned, making things safe and not being a jerk and da-da-da. And then there was this pushback of like, now, what you're doing here is you're not just like broadening the market. You are taking something from us and giving it to this other group that we don't even know if they're going to be it because they're not here yet in big numbers. So like, why are you taking this from us? And it's so you hear things like, okay, well, why are you listening to the vocal minority? Why are you listening to, when, meanwhile, we're trying to articulate that there may be not many of us right now, but we're looking at the demographics. We're trying to represent a future demographic. But from that moderate perspective, it's like, okay, or like the people that are here already, right? There's a perspective of like, okay, no, like really, we're not along for the ride, in various ways and in various reasons. So I wanted to like put the conversation, because we could talk about representation all day and how great it is, but there are some people out there who either don't like representation at all or who don't like how it's happening. They don't like the volume. They don't like the words that are being used. They don't like the Twitter kerfuffles and whatever. Like, maybe they're for representation, but they're like, no, not like that. Now I don't want to play anymore. So we should break that down, because you encountered that specifically, directly when we could start there, when you put out your survey.
Yeah, no, and this has happened a bunch of times. And again, it's really, really interesting to me because, I have this like corporate background. I'm, studying to do my PhD and investigating the space as I did beginning in 2018. I thought, there's something here and I really want to kind of dip my toe into the water and figure out what's going on. And what I was surprised by, and I guess I'm a bit naive, is how visceral and toxic and frankly, really disturbing I found the discourses. And, I'm not going to, they're not my stories to tell, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. But what I encountered when I first started looking at this sector was the level of toxicity and some really, really good people who can't, for reasons of safety, participate in online discourse about board gaming, period. For their own safety. People who had their children threatened, they've received death threats. And I was really surprised by that. And, again, taking my, multinational corporate lens, I thought, there's another factor that's really delimiting the hobby. And, this happens in other sectors where this kind of behavior really keeps people away.
Mhm.
And I can share, just from my own experiences, you do this thing, if you're a woman or a BIPOC individual, LGBTQ, you look for safety. And so what I will always do, no matter where I go, I was just thinking about this the other day. If I enter a store, and I scan the environment. Sometimes going into a store as well, especially right now, but I don't leave my house. But before the pandemic, I will look for things that give me pause and make me think, okay, well, do I really want to come back here? I used to walk into some game stores, I shan't say the names, and I would see the manager berating staff. It was dirty. People were having loud, angry conversations. Things were in disarray. There was a lot of toxic behavior, some really offensive artwork on the walls. Things that just made me think, if I didn't have my significant other here with me, I would not come back here. And that was a really interesting thing. And I was like, seriously, this can't possibly be sustainable, and again, that's what got me really curious about, okay, there's a disconnect. There's a real appetite. I meet people all the time who, like board gaming, but don't like that culture. And so that is another key delimiting factor in board gaming. And that's something that I've definitely heard. I'm just going to pop this one open, which is that 1 in 3 of the participants in my survey actually said, I don't go to public gaming events at all because I'm afraid to go to those public events, for a variety of reasons. Some of it was, I can't get childcare. I don't have a lot of leisure time. When I do, I can only do it, in my home. But other people reported these really harrowing stories about how they knew they were not welcome. They heard they were not welcome, and they didn't want to engage for fear. That's a huge problem. And again, if I were a financial backer to a publisher, if I were a large or mid-sized or even small publisher, this dynamic would really trouble me, because that's something that is actually keeping you small. It's keeping you barely solvent.
Mm-hmm.
And that toxicity that surrounds this particular sector keeps people away. And even people who don't engage with board game Twitter or read it like I do systematically every single day as a researcher, they're aware of it. And one of the other things that I found was that 1 in 3 said if they engage with board game topics online, they have received online threats, insults, and or rude messages. So a lot of people. And that's another huge problem for the sector, because if people are scared to even talk about it online, how can you find out who your audience is? Mm-hmm. There's a huge, giant, quiet majority of people who really, really like this, who really want to do this, but cannot be made known. They can't make that known online because they're scared to do it, because there's a toxic community. And so, and again, as a researcher, I've uncovered this myself, where it's a little like I'm I'm a private eye, trying to investigate a particular problem in an organization. And right out of the gate in my first study, a very small scale, very, very careful study, I received threats. And, it was kind of like, the investigator looking at whether a workplace was toxic and getting threatened by the people in the workplace. And, your eureka moment comes almost immediately when you say, okay, I've been asked to investigate this and I've received a bunch of death threats. So yeah, maybe the community is a bit toxic. Mm-hmm. So that's a really fascinating dynamic and another key delimiting factor. And what is, I think, the big message I would love to get out there as loudly as I possibly could is it's up to leaders. It's up to people with big platforms. It's up to the publishers. It's up to these big corporations and their funders to make that stop. That is never going to be good for business. That toxicity in that community is keeping you small, is delimiting your growth, and is actually stopping innovation. And that is a death knell to any sector. If you can't solve that, then you will not grow, period.
Let's make it real for the people, Tanya. Show them some of the slides that you have of
Yeah.
the specific pieces of feedback that you've gotten that were not great.
This is my little image that reminds me of where this is in the presentation. It's a little picture of a troll. I'm going to pop it up. So here we go. So, one of the things, and again, just investigating this as a researcher, this was some of the most recent commentary I got. And this is a fascinating comment. This is a Twitter user who, systematically harasses individuals on Twitter in the board gaming space. I'm intentionally sharing the individual's name because this is a fascinating.
Well, it's a fake name. It's not a
fake name. Yeah, it's a Twitter handle of many.
Right.
And one of the interesting things about this is, and just think about this statement. So I was sharing the diversity of my sample. And this person writes back, that's because no one normal would help you with your stupid project. But what's fascinating about this is normal means white male.
White male. Well, white male gamer, yeah.
Yeah. And this is a really, really interesting area of research that is happening in every possible field right now. A lot of the default human in healthcare, in engineering, in human-computer interaction studies is that the default human is the white male. A lot of our products, services, company organizations, the way we're structured as we work during the day, have been designed with a certain imagined person in mind. That is a white middle-class male with a certain educational background. And you see this playing out in a lot of things, software, hardware, even the way we design airplanes. The default human has always been imagined to be the white male. And this person is just parroting back what the broader culture does, which is the default human is not a woman, is not a racialized person, a Black, Indigenous person of color. It is not anyone other than a white, heterosexual, middle-class male. That's normal, right?
So two things. One, in defense. So I'll put this in post. And I saw this at the Game Hub presentation. This picture of this is a sample of protagonists in video games. It's a lot of white men. It's a lot, like if you just the main protagonist. So like you might have diversity, in your cast, but like the protagonist, the front-facing character, the one on the box that's looking at you, is almost always a white man. So that becomes like the normal person, right? So we're not just talking about board games. We'll talk about video games. Talk about all over the place.
It's everything, and
it's all over the place, everywhere.
Yeah, and there's actually the monomyth. Joseph Campbell's monomyth is often a hero alone, and it's often a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or white male protagonist that has a journey and claims his prize. His prize is often his lady love. And this particular narrative structure plays out in a lot of things. So board gaming's not alone. It's part of a larger cultural issue. But this is, again, a very sociologically fascinating comment to me, because that notion of normal, that notion of default human pervades our entire culture. It's systemic.
Right.
And so, women's healthcare is not as well researched. You can think of a number of different fields, sectors, and human endeavors where, if you're not a white male, you are forgotten, or products are not designed for you. And again, this is a pervasive problem, not just in board gaming.
Right. Okay. So I am going to, and I sent you this, and I think this is about as good a place as any to put this one in, because there is a counter argument. And, I try to be empathetic. I try to reach out to the other sides. And obviously we have a perspective here in Shelf Stories, and you are free to, interact with that in the comments, all that kind of stuff. Okay. But there is a comment. So what I imagine a person would say, pushing back against that, would be that it's not about, we think that white men are the normal, right? It's not quite about that. It's about the SJWs are spreading ideology. They're spreading indoctrinated. Like the white men could be indoctrinated by SJW nonsense. So like what they might mean by as a quote unquote normal gamer is someone who is not infected by SJW nonsense. Right.
Right.
So, like, okay. and I'm gonna read a part of a passage, right?
Sure.
And I sent this to you. We're gonna kind of break this. We're gonna break this down. You said you had
Oh,
some interesting comments to that.
yes.
So then, so it kind of bleeds the line, right? So it's like, okay, there's a sense of like, okay, the white man is the quote unquote normal, but we're not, you know, but there's also this other piece of, you know, SJW nonsense. So here we go. So this was in response to when Elizabeth Hargrave and others, she wasn't the only one. But you know, because of her platform and because of her stature, hers got the most attention. When Tiny Bit Dungeons launched and it had a scantily clad female with a suggestive sexualized pose on the front cover, you know, the comments were, you know, like, can we look at this, please? And then, and then the pushback that's what we're talking about here is the pushback, and this is one of the comments that came down here. So then I'm going to just read a section of it. So the modern board game industry, as we know it, was brought into the limelight predominantly by white men. Women and minorities said, hey, we want to play. So we said, sure, play our games, but didn't stop there. Next it was, hey, we want to be included. So guys like Jamie Stedmeyer gave Elizabeth Hargrave a shot as a designer, and admittedly, she put out a home run with Wingspan, apparently a surprise. That should have been inspiration for women to break into the industry with hard work, proving yourself with great design, and putting out quality games with themes and covers you find appropriate. But no. Just like with every other good thing in life the last few years, movies, TV, just like you said, movies, TV, video games, sports, etc. So we're talking in the same language. The SJWs start coming in with the complaining and demanding for change, demanding for inclusivity, demanding for justice, because we can't have covers like this anymore. And anyone who cries boo and decides to fight back is called racist, sexist, etc. White males silently put up with it over the last year in almost every facet of our life, and we've reached a breaking point. Our voices suddenly become silent. We're told that we are the issue. We're told to shut up about things we have no business speaking about. I have gotten sick and tired of sitting back, hearing, complaining. This is where I start saying that the white male doesn't need to be, you know, silenced. So,
Yeah, it's incredibly. I really read that with a great deal of interest. What's fascinating about it is Elizabeth Hargrave, because I read board game Twitter every day systematically like a researcher. What she did was she would basically send out a tweet that said, you know, what's going on with the lighting on this particular board game cover. She said, you know, what, because there was lighting direction was a bit of a challenge in that particular cover, and there was a particular unique light source that was on the cleavage of one of the characters, and so it appeared that there was a multiple light sources. And she just it was a kind of it was a jokey, lighthearted comment. Nothing about, you know, this cover needs to go, this Kickstarter is no good, nothing like that. It was a very
cancel the crew, cancel culture,
nothing.
cancel them. Yeah,
Incredibly supportive of the designer and the Kickstarter. Never once said, you know, but she made a kind of tongue-in-cheek comment about the multiple lighting sources and was wondering about the physics of it. Why was, you know, did light suddenly appear on the cleavage of this one character? And what's fascinating is all of the things that happened after that. Now, I can share that, again, this is cultural. So it's a larger force at work than even that individual, Bram, in the Kickstarter was aware. What I would love for Bram to do is to take a step back and wonder aloud to himself, why are you so angry? What makes you angry about an individual making a tongue-in-cheek, flippant, not even flippant, very like serious remark about lighting physics in this particular cover art? It would be something that anyone doing it any day of the week. There are, you know, tens of thousands of these kinds of comments on Twitter. What specifically about this comment made you so angry?
I can answer that. Let me answer in the voice of Bram.
Sure.
Right, I'll go. I try to be as empathetic as I can. Okay, so if I acquire that persona, what made me so angry? Okay, so this is not the first time, right? This is a thing that has happened for, you know, game after game after game after game after game. It's not just like the one comment. And you know, if you don't, it's like seeing a roach. Like, okay, if I see one roach, I'm sure that there are others around it. And to be sure, it wasn't like you said, it was her tweet, but like I remember when the project first launched, There were others who wrote blogs and who wrote tweets. And so it was like it was almost like Elizabeth's tweet was at the crest of a wave. And that wave was going to swallow the game and make it safe. Right. And safe being in the like you said before, like what is a normal male? That is the lefty scare quote.
Yep.
The righty scare quote is safe.
Right.
And what does that mean? Safe means safe, not interesting. Safe, political, which means that I can no longer use this game to escape because it's going to give me political messages, and it's not going to, or whatever. So then what Bram wanted to say was what made me so comfortable about that was because it's the world is changing and the world we knew was good. And just speaking from Bram's perspective, like, okay, the things were trending in the right direction anyway, without the nonsense. Elizabeth Hargrove is allowed to design. Eric Lang is allowed to design. How about more? And come on in and just, let the market churn. If you want to come in and then let that happen. Let the market speak.
Mm-hmm.
The loud voices, the podcast, Jason on Shelf Stories, Tanya on her channel, Sen and Eric and Mandy and all these other people that are saying things are just that we're actively making it worse. We're actively subverting a process that could happen naturally because, and not every and we'll get to that. Not every part of pushback believes in diversity, but at least someone like Bram would say, yeah, I believe in diversity. That's great. We can get there without the loudness and the wokeness and the indoctrination.
Yeah. So what's really fascinating about that specific dynamic is I'm not sure that individual knows why the fact that a woman says something that would have been probably passed without notice if a guy had said, hey, check out the weird lighting on that cleavage, period. Just musing aloud, like, what's going on here with the lighting? That's what she said. And this resulted in a firestorm of controversy that continues to this day. And the fact that a woman is saying something that is it was factual, it was slightly funny. If it were a guy saying that, you probably wouldn't have gotten so mad. And I think the other thing that I will say, and there's a lot of dynamics like this. I read an article years ago, and I think about it sometimes. There's parts of certain beaches where you try and surfboard. You say you schlep on the beach with your rented surfboard, and the diehard people that are there are like, get out of our area of the beach. This is ours. That's our waves. Get out. And there's actually some violence that happens as a result of that. And I sometimes think that that's kind of the dynamic that goes on in gaming. Mm-hmm. That this is our space. When you walk into
territoriality, yes.
Yeah. You walk into certain friendly local game stores and you get a weird look. I mean, I've gotten them all the time. I'm a middle-aged white woman, mostly wearing all black, who comes into, your space. I'm asking questions. You want to talk to your buddies. You got to go and talk to this, probably a mom. How boring. And you go into some of those game stores and it's like, I've just invaded their space. I've done something transgressive. And you don't want me there because I'm getting in the way of your community and your fun. But that mentality is horrifyingly selfish. If you believe in gaming, so I'm talking to Bram here now. If you believe in gaming, like I believe in gaming, I actually believe like gaming is like medicine. I actually carry little games in my purse. And I will give them out to kids. I'm weird that way. I love gaming. I think it actually is. It is an empathy engine. It is a way to heal. It is a way to relax. It's a way to tell stories. It's a way to connect with people. I love it. Why wouldn't you want to do anything you possibly could to make it more inclusive? And if people are telling you, if I'm telling you, if a lot of voices in this industry are telling you that representation is just a little modification, more themes, different stories, representation on artwork is a way in, why would you ever want to stop someone from feeling welcome and playing if you care about it like I do?
Because let me invoke Bram, right? I'll invoke Bram because you tell me what to do, right? And so like, you know, let's say it's a publisher, right? You know, so like Isaac with Frosthaven, or, you know, again, we'll bring back the Witcher example if people don't know it. You know, the Witcher was a large Kickstarter, very large and successful, off of the IP. The source material of the IP is based on Slavic myths, which is, you know, like, you know, racially white, but it's difficult when it comes to European state. But like in terms of how we process as Americans, we're looking at a bunch of white guys. But I did want to at least bring in the European context. Anyway, okay. So from our perspective, a bunch of white guys, and there are no female witchers. And in the base game, there were no female witchers. And then I think they were included either as a stretch goal or as like an add-on or anything like that.
Yep.
But you know, and they'll eventually kind of put it in. But like with the core experience out of the box, dudes, white dudes, right? Okay. So then when we talk about representation, when you know Tanya comes in and she says, I want to be represented, I want to be included, that sounds to me, speaking in the place of a brand person, as you're telling me what to do. And if the author wants to make a product, they should make the product. And I shouldn't hear, you know, that'd be great. Make your own products. You know, the field is clear. No one's stopping you. You know, no one's stopping the BIPOC designer or whatever it is. And if you make great games, great. But if a person wants to make something, then they should have that authorial kind of authority. They shouldn't have those constraints, and they shouldn't feel that pressure. That's the thing. When a right person talks about the left, they always talk in terms of pressure. Mm-hmm. Like we're pressuring people, and we're guilting people. We're using our victimhood to weaponize and, you know, like browbeat change. And that there's no way that we could do it. In fact, like the word woke, and I might have a separate thing on the word woke. You know, use woke in my comments, you will get removed, by the way, because woke automatically means pressure and basically reverse racism. Like you're basically calling somebody reverse racist, racist against white people. And so, like you talked about, like, and I was listening to you before, talking about like, you know, normal white men, everything that sounds to Bram like you're racist against white people.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. So here's another really important dynamic, and I'm going to try and not get too jargony. But I'm white. In fact, I'm practically I'm so pale. My whole family is desperately pale. We're so white, and there's a really interesting dynamic among a lot of the white respondents that filled out my survey, of which there was about 76-ish% were white. And one of the things that they shared with me is, and it's this idea, it's called homophily. You don't, it's a big word, it's a sociological concept. And it's this notion that, you know, white people want to see other white people. That's kind of, if you distill it down, that's the kind of the heart of it for marketing,
which a modern person will deny.
Yes,
they'll deny because they'll say I only see people. I don't see race. I see people. That they'll deny that. But go ahead. Just want to set the context because it explains a lot of the break and the misunderstanding we're having.
Homophily, break it down, is love of the same. So you know, and it's used a lot in marketing, and it's actually incredibly incorrect. And there's a whole wonderful lecture by Dr. Wendy Chun. I totally recommend Homophily. It's amazing. But basically what she does is she takes you through this discredited sociological concept from the 60s and 70s, where it's this idea that people like to stick to their own. Super offensive. And it's used in a lot of things now, this mythological concept. So I'm a white person, and I don't want to see white people on everything. And I'm representative of legions of white people who don't want to see that in our anything. I seek out diversity. And when you look at some of the demography and the educational backgrounds and the kind of perspectives of some of the people who filled out the survey, I heard that from white participants overwhelmingly. I want different experiences, and particularly from my leisure. I want to see diversity in my films. I want to read diversity in my books. I want to play diversity in my games. I'm white. So this discredited idea of love of the same is bunk. It's absolutely a terrible, terrible marketing idea. It's a terrible product design idea. And people have a tendency to want to design around an imagined audience that's a lot like them. Mm-hmm. And that makes for bad products. And I used to have to say this to tech companies all the time. If you're imagining that your users are exactly like you, that's a bad strategy, because that just tells me you haven't done your research, that you're not looking at who your real audience is, and you haven't even bothered to go out and chat with people. And so this idea of homophily, love of the same, that's not even resonant with white people. So again, I'm not necessarily, my research isn't targeted at BRAM necessarily. It is targeted at the publishers who make games. And I think that I'm trying to prevail upon publishers, people who make and develop games, that this is the wrong strategy. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't, and I'm white, Bram. I'm talking to Bram. I'm white. And I am absolutely disheartened and appalled that I would ever ask a company or a sector to keep people out, to prevent them from enjoying this incredible hobby in any way, shape, or form. That doesn't make any sense to me. And feeling that kind of visceral anger, it's something else. And the fact that a woman is speaking up online about something, we all have it. It's all inside of us, where sometimes I even have it. So I grew up in a very, very rural place in Canada. And sometimes I'll be really nervous to speak up, because I was raised to, I ate after the men ate. I worked on a farm. I was raised very traditionally. And sometimes I even have these moments where I think, oh, that woman should stop speaking up because she might get in trouble. I have these visceral feelings inside because I've been enculturated by a culture. And sometimes I'll feel upset or angry about something, and I don't even know why. I'm scared about something. And it's because we've been enculturated in such a way that when someone is speaking up who is not an authority or a person who should be speaking up, and who are those people? Think about it, analyze yourself, and realize that your visceral anger is coming from something that you've been enculturated to believe. And I had this problem in my early career where I shouldn't be speaking up because women don't speak up. And that's a really tricky thing. And that visceral anger that these individuals feel comes from a deep cultural place.
Okay.
So they're victims too.
Okay. I mean, I will continue. Well, let's continue. I will go as far as I can, just from what I try to understand. Okay. So someone like Bram would say, and I don't want to if the actual Bram is watching it, this is not personal. This is just like a construction, right? Okay. They would say, I don't mind when a woman speaks up. I don't mind when a black person, I have a lot of black friends or whatever they'll say. What I mind is when they make me feel like I'm a racist for liking a thing, right? So I like The Witcher. Does that make me sexist? I like, I don't mind the grid of, white men that, in terms of our video game, in terms of the protagonist. Like I really enjoy that stuff. And that's, as more than I like it, it's my escape, right? And so there's that trope too of like, this is my escape. Like, this is something, I work hard, I make all the right choices, I do everything that I want to do. And it's like, okay, this is my escape. I want to do this, and I want to be able to enter this space without anybody on the outside telling me that I'm bad. So you could open your mouth and say stuff. It's just what you're saying. This woke nonsense that I'm racist or sexist or whatever for just wanting to escape and just wanting to play games.
Yeah, and that's another really, really interesting thing, where it's like, don't bring your real world concerns into my escape. But that's a really, really interesting kind of a logical fallacy, because it already is. So, for example, with The Witcher, and I'm actually of Slavic descent. I actually studied Slavic folklore.
Pobuda,
yeah. It means something hilarious in Czech. Don't look it up. It's terrible. I actually had a Czech-speaking guy who said it means hobo, but bad, like an insult. Anyway, I think that's hilarious. But what's interesting about Slavic culture is, and this is another really interesting fallacy that comes up a lot from European players and designers, is our cultures aren't diverse. Are you Are you kidding? Of course they are. And, even I worked with an archaeologist a couple summers ago, and I was arguing with someone online about the fact that Viking culture was diverse. Now, it was because Vikings collected people from their various raids. It wasn't for a good reason, but their communities were diverse. So was medieval, England. It had diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I have in potentially like a background. My family's it's called Black Irish, which is a weird term, and it's basically this idea that Turkish people came to Ireland and had kids with Irish people. The point being that all of these communities have always been diverse, every single one of them. You were setting something in medieval UK, it's diverse. A Viking village, there's diversity there. The one argument I got, Great Western Trails, is all men, and there are women cattle drivers. I was raised on a ranch, and everybody rode horses and herded cattle. You have to on a farm. So the point here is that women's stories have always been there. Black, Indigenous, persons of color stories have always been there. And we're willfully deciding as makers, as creators, as companies to never tell their stories. And that's weird. I just think it's odd. And, as a kid, and I can only, again, go back to my anecdotal experience, as a kid, I was not allowed to play or enter these spaces. Dungeons and Dragons were just coming up. I begged to join a group, and they told me girls don't play games. And I was told I couldn't join. The point is that it's delimiting both the growth of the sector as well as human flourishing, because we're not allowing people in. So it's, going into that friendly local game store and having everyone turn and say in various ways, you're not welcome here. And why do you want to do that? Why do you want to protect that space? What about, other people entering that space and having those experiences do you want to keep from them? Why do you want to keep that from them? And that's the thing that I puzzle over all the time. It's like a kid, it's like a mean kid with all the toys saying, get out. Right. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good ethic or approach to your life. And I find it genuinely flummoxing. So the point being that, the lack of diversity, the lack of representation across multiple cultural spheres is a process of enculturation and culture emphasis on the default human, purported default human. And that is, we're all kind of victims of this larger cultural problem. And it's taken me years to see it clearly, doing a ton of reading and a ton of talking to people and a ton of research to get to a place where I understand that everyone is kind of in this machinery of exclusion. Right. And it's unfortunate. And I wish we weren't doing that to each other.
Okay, gonna put Bram away. Yeah, this is great. I think that laying out a lot of issues. Okay, so number one, if now it's kind of Jason talking to Bram or whoever else, we're not trying to replace y'all, right? What Tanya said was, we don't want to see only white men. Right? Is that fair? Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. And, if I were, a leader of a game group or a leader of a particular group or somebody who is in that beachhead, that epicenter of gaming, I would be doing whatever I possibly could to welcome people in. I would be an ambassador, yeah. And there's a story about when I started really early stage gaming way back, in the 90s. I was a member of Lambda Mu, which was this community. And my job was to stand by the door, sometimes and welcome people in and show them around. It was the thing I loved to do the most. And once I got my sea legs in that community, all I wanted to do was show people around. And I don't understand, when you're passionate about gaming, why you don't want to do that. It's genuinely heartbreaking.
So, okay. So a couple things. So the context here, I have to reiterate it over and over and over again. We're not trying to replace. We all we want is to advocate for a gaming space that looks like the community. If the community is drifting towards this kind of majority minority paradigm, that doesn't mean that we want to like wipe out all white people. And maybe some people get scared by the way that some people our side talk on Twitter. Oh, get these white people out of here. Da, 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 da. You know, it's like, okay, breaking that down and looking at what the longer thread of what people are saying, so like longer reviews like this and longer studies like Tanya, it's not about replacement, it's not about making hating white people. I'm on the One Stop Co-op shop, I'm surrounded by white people all the time. It's like it's me and 5 white dudes. It's fine, it's just there's this mindset, right? And what is the mindset, right? What the mindset is that there's a panic that sets in, right? There's a moral panic when change happens too fast. Like they did a study and it was really fascinating about like the people who were at the January 6th incident at the White House. And many of the people there were not necessarily from poor places. They were from neighborhoods that experienced rapid demographic change. And it was disorienting, right? And, that it was a clue to them that now I'm not safe. Where it's like, well, you are, I guess, but it just doesn't feel right, because we're talking a lot about feelings here. So then it happens in like your neighborhoods, like the neighborhood, like all of a sudden, like if we call it the tipping point. So it's like if the diversity gets to a point where like the neighborhood doesn't feel like there anymore, they're out, or they're just gonna, or they'll rage. Yeah, that was trending the other day. White rage. What's white rage? White rage is fear that change will take away the dominant space. And that's kind of what that's kind of what we're facing, like in terms of where is this backlash coming from? Like you said before, the flummoxing thing. Well, they're afraid that hierarchy is going to flip and they're going to be on the bottom, or like they're going to be erased entirely, or that we're a bunch of racists and we're going to give racism to them. And if you use the labels, if you use woke and mob, like of course that's all you're going to see. So I really encourage you to not use those labels, but we'll talk about that other time. But does that make sense in terms of like explaining the flummoxing idea? Like, like that the sense of like, it isn't just like a easy thing. There's a panic that sets in where it's like, I can have one token, I can have 2 tokens, but then if I reach a threshold, ooh,
yeah,
not mine anymore.
One of the I actually I had to do a research project on moral panics, and what you've described is an incredibly good example. So, for example, when bicycles were entering the scene in 18th century London, or the countryside in Britain, there was this moral panic about the fact that women would become they would physiologically change because they were going to be bike riding, and they would actually become wanton women with no morals. They would have their features would become coarsened, and they would get what was called bicycle face. They would actually lose their ability to have children because bicycles were from Satan. The automobile then came, and people put caltrops, obstructions on the road to prevent the rise of the automobile, because they were alarmed by the race of progress. Mm-hmm. So these kinds of forces have existed throughout history. Plato, Socrates railed against the written word and said that, when you started to write things down, this technology was just too weird. You would lose your ability to conjure your own thoughts, and that the written word would get in the way of your, spiritual, goodness. And you wouldn't be able to, recite huge epic poems from rote anymore, because you'd be writing them down. That's a cheat. We have, as human beings, done this to ourselves over and over and over. Or, name the technology. There's been a moral panic about it. D&D was a moral panic. I wrote an essay about how the satanic panic in Canada it started in out west, and Dungeons and Dragons was part of it. And I remember as a teenager thinking, this is really dumb. Because people didn't understand it. They didn't like the way things were changing. They didn't get it. And they wrapped it in this sort of panicky, satanic thing.
Yeah. And the panic is fear. The panic is fear that the world as I know it is going to end.
And I don't like it.
I am going to be on the bottom of something. I'm going to have stuff taken away. My product's going to change. My
Yep.
fun is going to change,
Yep.
and for the worse. And they're going to, people are going to take stuff away from me, and they're going to tell me what to do. And in terms of, and that's that to me, that's like the two things. Like, okay, don't take my stuff. Don't tell me what to do. And like moral change inspires that sense of like, okay, and well, that like change does, and when we speak. Like to your point before, like when a woman speaks and like and with authority, it's not just like speaking, but with speaking with authority. Like there's on some folks, there's a sense of like, okay, my world is going to change for the worse, and I'm going to lose out. And that may sound stigmatizing. That may sound like I'm kind of like saying that you're that's not what I'm saying. Like everybody feels this. That's what you said. Like everybody feels this at any kind of change.
Yep.
And that's why we wanted to, put the flag out there. It's like, okay, we're not trying to flip hierarchies. We're not trying to be racist against white people.
Nope.
We just want the board gaming community to look like the community. That's it.
100%. And it comes down to, again, the people that I'm addressing with my research are much more around the publishers and the people who are creating these games. But again, I would say that you can look to history and see how these moral panics crop up when often it's a perfect storm of ignorance insofar as they don't know what the new thing is. When people were talking about bicycles back in the day, there were pastors writing letters to the editor about how awful they were because they didn't really understand what this new thing was or what it was going to do to everybody. And so that perfect storm of kind of lack of knowledge about this new thing that people are asking for, combined with just fear, and fear then is anger. I went to this great workshop where, someone broke it down and said, when people get really, really angry, they're just scared. They're really scared. And, and I always know whenever I hear from somebody who's really angry, I think this person is just terrified. And I try to, approach them with a little bit of invitational rhetoric and as nice as I possibly can be, because I realize, when I get a death threat or I get a terrible remark on Twitter, I'm just dealing with somebody who is a deeply fearful person who doesn't understand what's happening. And
Although what I will say is, so kind of coming to an end. We've really gone down the road, but this has been a really fascinating conversation. I do think that I don't want to let people off the hook on that. Like I think most folks are kind of, in that scared mode of like, okay, what's happening over here? This sounds bad, and they put it on the person. They don't they don't do that self-reflective mode. Especially the change outside. That's another like aspect of what you're talking about. Like when the moral panic, when a change happens from outside and they can't control it and they can't like it seems foreign. So it's like, oh no. So then yes, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like feels. There's a and I find that a good response is empathy and kindness. I've had people come up, on my YouTube with the words, the buzzy words. Whoa, cancel culture, CRT, whatever it is. Talk through them, and it's like, oh wow, this isn't as bad as I thought, and that's cool. But there is that small core, that trolley core, that truly is homophobic, racist.
Yep.
And my invitation to people who are either in like just like a moderate I want to play space, or in that hurt I'm being accused of being a racist space. It's like what you're holding on to is actually giving cover to really nasty elements.
100%. And absolutely. I mean, empathy is not sympathy. I can imagine why they're like this, but I think that the way that they're dealing with their anger is the most destructive way possible.
Sympathy means you agree with the person.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Empathy means you understand the person, but
I can imagine why this person is enormously fearful and how maladaptively they're dealing with their fear. I don't sympathize with it whatsoever. Empathy means I can imagine why it's like that, but I don't condone it by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. And what you said before, that the maladaptive treating, like how you choose to react to how you're feeling, and how you choose to react to how you interpret what I'm saying or what a lefty quote unquote person is saying. And it is interpretation. Like not every lefty is a raging person ready to call everybody racist. Sorry. Like you gotta to deconstruct and like really understand what we're trying to say. Make the board gaming community look like the actual community. That's all we're trying to say. So then that triggered reaction, they may end up being trolling themselves. And give a threat. And, but what that does is you develop that language, woke, cancel culture, whatever it is. And then that really trolly person is going to just lift all that language and shoot a threat.
Yep. 100%.
And this is something that you have dealt with in your, as you were doing your surveys. So.
Yeah, 100%. And like, again, I'm speaking to the business owners and the publishers and the people who run large conventions and that sort of thing. If there were somebody in your store, let's just go back to the toy store or the game store analogy, and that person, and this is the death threat that I got, there's a customer in the store. This is just a horrifying example of a very extreme death threat that I got. And that person turned to a fellow customer in the store and said, "I wish I could drop you into Alaska to have you be eaten by bears." And this was it was a very elaborate threat. I think it involved like booking helicopters, and I would be dropped nude into a bunch of bears in Alaska. This person was obviously very deranged. If that customer said that to another person in the store, what would that do to your business? It probably would be bad, right? And it would be a conversation I probably would never forget if I was on the receiving end of that threat.
And if the rest of the store saw that and thought that was okay.
Yep. And the staff was like, fine, whatever, that person, he always threatens people with bears. He just likes bears. And I discounted the threat because I thought, well, that's really weird. What a strange thing to say to someone. But what would that do to your business? It could possibly cause lots of knock-on effects. The problem we've got is this very small, tiny minority percentage of gamers who engage in this kind of conduct. But what they're doing has an outsized effect on the growth of the sector, on the growth of the hobby. Those voices, like that conversation, I probably would never forget that conversation. I probably would never go to that store again. But the store owner just decides, hey, cool, that's the bear guy. He says that to women that come into the store. I'm going to be okay with it. Your business will never, ever grow because of that toxic element, right? And again, bringing it down to a store level is an interesting way to look at it, because would you allow that as a business owner? Probably not, right?
And there's this idea that we're the toxic ones for insisting on addressing it.
Yeah, and I think that
we get accused of being toxic all the time, of like, oh, the BGG is toxic, and I can't say my thing, and it's like, okay, well, what exactly are you saying? We're saying stuff like, I don't know, like I saw this in a forum that it just like blew me away. It's like, BGG banned me. I don't know why BGG banned me. My comment was so innocuous. The comment was, this woke BS is taking over the industry, and we're giving it to BLM Marxists.
Yep.
And that was the comment. It's like, how could I have gotten banned for that? It's like, really? That's a question? And it's like, when you build a permission structure that says, oh, well, he talks about BLM Marxists all the time, and meanwhile, my wife will come with a BLM shirt, and it's like, okay, well, there's angry BLM Marxist guy. He's ranting again. What's my wife going to do?
Exactly.
And it just multiplies over different examples. Yep. And it's like, we're not trying to get rid of all the white men. We're not racist against white men. There's strong language, but at the end of the day, look at the sweep of our arguments. Look what we're trying to actually accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic. So if someone was in the middle of a mall or the middle of a store or the middle of a street shouting these things, what would happen to them? If I were shouting, homophobic, sexist, racist remarks in any setting in a private business, what would happen to me? And I think that's the kind of thing that, we tend to not conflate online with offline. And I think we need to do that more. We need to say, okay, if I were shouting that on a street corner,
great point.
What would happen to me? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in an online forum, well, let's just leave it.
If I say something online and I can't say it in real life, then it's probably going to cause a problem. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we've really drilled down and tried to understand where the pushback comes from and the moral panic. I love that. I didn't even know you did a whole paper on moral panics.
Oh, I adore moral panics. They're really funny. and actually what's great is when you look at them historically, you can say, well, that was dumb. But it's the distance of history, the distance that history kind of gives you to go, oh, we've been through that before. Mm-hmm. And we got through it, and people drive cars now, or people ride bikes, and
we have black women on board game covers. It's not bad.
And the world didn't end. Satan didn't take over. People didn't change physically like they thought with bicycles. So yeah.
All right. So this was Tanya Pobuda. Please let us know what is in the future for you. Probably more presentations of this very thing that you shared on Shelf Stories in terms of the demographic stuff. You probably have because I could tell like you've given that a couple of times. You probably have more of those. So tell us where you're you're going in the future.
Yeah, so I've just finished academic conference season where you share your preliminary results. My dissertation is now going into final review. I'm hoping to publish either a book or a collection of essays. And I'm going to be doing some publishing various academic journals. I'm going to try to make them all open journals. I did commit that to the people who participated in my survey, so you'll be able to read it. It won't be behind a paywall. And I want to keep doing this work because I think this sector really needs a level of professionalization, a level of audience research. And I'm really, really keen to share my research for free with any publisher who wants to sit down and talk to me.
Yep. Very easy to reach. T Pobuda on Twitter.
Yes.
And Instagram and different links like that too. What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, it's at Pobuda Tanya on Twitter, and then just T Pobuda on Instagram. I'm terrible at Instagram, so if I don't get back to you, I just don't spend much time there. Mm-hmm. And you can also go to my website, TanyaPobudaPhD.com, and I have lots of projects there.
All right. Thank you very much for stopping by the show. Do not be a stranger.
Thanks so much.
If you could change your mind, you could change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.